Hey kids, welcome to the Fort, where each week we get to read stories together. Today's story is called The Priest with Dirty Clothes by R.C. Sproul. Those clothes do look dirty. Let's read. Many years ago, in a faraway land, the people of a small village crowded into a large church. It was nighttime. The church was dark except for the candles that were lit inside, casting shadows on the high walls. A young man named Jonathan was lying on the floor with his arms stretched out so that his body was in the shape of a cross. A great bishop prayed for him. This was the most important night of Jonathan's life. He was about to become a priest. At the end of the ceremony, the bishop gave Jonathan the special clothes of a priest. First, the bishop gave Jonathan a blue robe with a white hood and helped him put it on over his long brown robe made of scratchy wool. Then the bishop tied a white cord around Jonathan's waist. Now Jonathan was a priest. The very next week, Jonathan was invited to the castle. He was to preach his first sermon to the royal household. Jonathan worked hard to prepare his sermon. He wanted it to be his very best. When it was time for Jonathan to go to the castle, it was raining very hard. Jonathan didn't want his new special clothes to get wet, but there was nothing he could do. He pulled the hood of his robe over his head and set out for the castle. As Jonathan and his horse made their way to the castle, the muddy road became more and more slippery. Suddenly, the horse slipped and stumbled, and Jonathan fell. Jonathan was not hurt, but he was muddy from head to toe. There was mud on his face and mud on his shoes. There was mud all over his blue robe. The white cord was no longer white. Jonathan was very upset. Jonathan tried hard to clean himself off, but there was no way he could clean his clothes and get to the castle on time. He thought about running away. He didn't want to preach in front of the king in dirty clothes. The king just has to understand, he thought. So Jonathan kept going until he reached the castle. When he arrived, Jonathan hurried into the castle. He looked for a place to clean himself, but the tower bells began to ring. It was time for the royal household to gather to hear Jonathan's sermon. Slowly, Jonathan walked to the place where he was to stand to open his Bible. As soon as the people saw Jonathan's dirty clothes, they began whispering. The king also was surprised to see the priest's mud-covered clothes. But the king was a kind and gentle ruler, and he could see that Jonathan was ashamed of his appearance. He knew that Jonathan must have a good reason for coming to the palace in such dirty clothes. At that moment, the court magician, whose name was Malice, stood up and shouted, "Wait! The priest cannot preach before the king wearing those dirty clothes." Malice was a very mean man. He hated all priests, even those that were clean. Because he was powerful and mean, the people were afraid of him. As soon as Malice shouted against Jonathan, other people began to yell mean things about Jonathan too. The king felt sorry for Jonathan. He didn't like the way Malice was behaving, and he was afraid that Malice might cause someone to harm the priest. The king stood and said to the people, "Be calm. Please stop talking. I will take care of this problem." The people grew silent. Even Malice stopped talking. The king then asked Jonathan to come forward. When Jonathan walked up to him, the king said, "Why did you come here in these dirty clothes?" Jonathan explained what happened. The king nodded and said, "I understand. I'm sorry that you had this accident. You cannot preach here today in dirty clothes, but I will give you another chance. You may come back next week and preach, but only if you wear clean clothes." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Jonathan said. "I am so sorry I'm so dirty. I promise that next week I will be clean." Jonathan left the castle as fast as he could. When he got home, the first thing he did was try to clean his clothes. But the stains were so deep, he couldn't get them out. The more he tried to clean his clothes, the worse they looked. They were so dirty. They looked like his old, scratchy brown robes. The next day, Jonathan took his special clothes to the town fuller. The fuller was the man who cleaned people's dirty clothes. He had special soaps that could get mud out of clothes. The fuller looked at Jonathan's clothes and said, "These are so dirty. I don't know if I can make them clean, but I'll do my best. Come back tomorrow." When Jonathan returned to the fuller's shop, the fuller said, "I'm afraid I can't make your clothes clean. They're ruined forever. The only thing you can do is get new clothes." But I can't get new clothes," Jonathan said. "These clothes were given to me by the bishop. He only gives out one set of clothes." "I'm sorry about that," the fuller said, "but there's nothing more I can do. You should go see the bishop. Maybe he can give you a new set of clothes so you can preach before the king." Jonathan didn't think the bishop would give him a new set of clothes, but he had to ask. So he went straight to the bishop's office. The bishop patiently listened to Jonathan's story. Then he said, "This is a sad thing that has happened to you, Jonathan. There's nothing I can do to help you." Jonathan was very upset. "Isn't there something I can do to get clean clothes?" he asked. "Please, let me do something special to earn new clothes." The bishop's face was sad. "No, Jonathan," he said. "The rules are clear. There's nothing you can do on your own to earn a new set of clothes. The only person who could help you is the great prince. Perhaps you should speak to him." The bishop gave Jonathan the directions to the palace of the great prince. Jonathan carefully followed the directions until he came to the palace where the great prince lived. He asked the guard for permission to see the prince, and the guard escorted Jonathan to a great hall where the prince was sitting on a throne. When Jonathan saw the prince, he was amazed. The prince was dressed in a long purple robe with precious jewels on it. There was a band around his waist made of pure gold. His face seemed to shine like the sun. Jonathan had never seen anyone like him. The prince looked at Jonathan with caring eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked in a voice that was soft and kind. "What do you need from me?" There's some great pictures on this page. Jonathan said, "Oh great prince, I am a new priest. I am to preach a sermon to the king's household. But I've ruined my clothes, and I cannot stand in front of the king without clean clothes. No one has been able to take and make my clothes clean. Is there anything you can do to help me?" Jonathan told the prince how his clothes had become dirty. The prince listened quietly and then said to Jonathan, "I understand your problem, and I can help you." "Are you going to clean my clothes?" Jonathan asked. "You will soon see, Jonathan," the prince replied. "But first, come with me to the fireplace." Jonathan followed the prince to the corner of the room where a small fire was burning in the fireplace. The prince pointed to a small branch at the edge of the fire. The branch had been partly burned, but it was no longer hot. The prince told Jonathan to pick up the branch. Jonathan reached down and picked up the branch. He held it and looked at it. It was black and charred. When the prince said Jonathan could put it down again, Jonathan put it back inside the fire. Then the prince said, "Now look at your hand." Jonathan looked down and saw his hand was black. It was covered with soot from the branch. "Jonathan," the prince said, "you are like the branch you pulled from the fire. You are covered with dirt, but the dirt is not just on your clothes, it's on your heart. Sin, the wrong things that you do, makes your heart dirty. No soap can make you clean." Then the prince said, "Jonathan, I can help you. Go to the castle next week and be ready to preach your sermon. Wear your dirty clothes. I'll take care of them." Jonathan felt sad and afraid. "But great prince," he said, "the king said I could not stand in front of him with my dirty clothes. And the evil magician Malice will do something mean to me if I enter the castle with dirty clothes on." A warm smile spread across the face of the great prince. "Yes, Jonathan, I know all about Malice and his meanness. I also know the king very well. You see, Jonathan, the king is my father." Jonathan asked, "How are you going to make my clothes clean?" The prince answered, "I promised you that I will take care of that. I never break my promises. I always do what I say I will do. Now go home and get ready for your sermon. I'll be there, and I'll do what I promised. When next week came, Jonathan was both excited and a little afraid. He thought about not going to the castle at all. And then he remembered the promise the prince had made to him. I'll trust the promise of the prince. I'll go to the castle, he said to himself. Jonathan went outside and got on his horse. This time the day was bright with sunshine. There was no storm clouds in the sky. Jonathan had no trouble making the journey to the castle. When he got there, he could see a crowd of people going in. Jonathan swallowed hard and walked inside to the place where he was to stand and preach. But just as soon as Jonathan took his position, Malice stood up and shouted, "May bad things happen to you, O priest. You are still wearing dirty clothes." The king looked at Jonathan and frowned. "Why are you here again with dirty clothes?" the king asked. "I told you that you could not stand in front of me looking like that." Jonathan felt ashamed. His face turned red. He could not even answer the king. The people began to whisper. Some shouted loudly, "Go away!" At that moment, someone came into the room. It was a man dressed in a scratchy brown robe exactly like the one Jonathan wore, under his special clothes. The man was carrying a present under his arm. At first, no one recognized the stranger. And then someone shouted, "Oh, it's the great prince!" Malice didn't know what to think. He asked, "What's the meaning of this? Why are you here? Why are you wearing those itchy robes?" The prince did not answer. He was smiling as he walked to the front of the room, and he stood next to Jonathan. And then the prince handed Jonathan the present and told him to open it. Everyone watched Jonathan as he carefully opened the gift the prince had given him. Jonathan's eyes grew wide when he saw what it was. It was the perfect present. Inside were the beautiful clothes that had once belonged to the prince. The prince smiled again at Jonathan and said, "These are the clean clothes I promised you. They are yours forever. They will never wear out. There is not a spot of dirt on them, and nothing can make them dirty. They are perfect for you." Then the prince said to Jonathan, "Take off your dirty clothes and give them to me." Jonathan took off his dirty clothes and gave them to the prince, and the prince put them on himself. Next, the prince said, "Put on my clothes and preach your sermon." Jonathan's hands shook as he put on the prince's beautiful clothes. When Jonathan was dressed, the prince said to the king, "Father, may Jonathan now stand in your presence? He is one of my people." The king was pleased. He said to the prince, "Yes, my son, as long as he wears your clothes, he may stand in front of me." Jonathan was filled with joy. "How can I ever thank you for being so kind to me?" he asked of the prince. The prince said, "If you are really thankful, and if you want to show that you love me, then keep all the commandments I give to you." "I will," Jonathan said. "I want to be good enough to wear your clothes." "You cannot be good enough, Jonathan. You must live your whole life trusting in my goodness while you wear my clothes." On that day, Jonathan preached his best sermon ever, and he spent the rest of his life preaching about the great prince. He wore the prince's perfect present until the day he died. And that is The Priest with Dirty Clothes by R.C. Sproul. You know, this story reminds me that our sin is a lot like my t-shirt today. It's black, and if this was dirt, it would be dirt all over. And if we need to be white and clean to get into heaven, well, my clothes would never be good enough. But Jesus, just like the prince in our story, takes his goodness, his clean clothes, and he wraps us in his clean clothes. And so when we stand before God, he doesn't see our sin anymore. He sees Jesus' perfectness. And you know, when Jesus died on the cross, he gave us these perfect clothes so that we can be perfect and be in heaven. Not because anything we did, but because of what he did. Thank you guys so much for hanging out in the fort with us today. Come back again and we'll read more fun stories. Bye.